Call to order the Finance Committee meeting for Thursday, October 21st. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lear?
Present.
Mr. Swanson? Mr. Hess? Ms. Polk? Ms. Weber? Present. Mr. Payton? Present. Ms. Parker? Present. Mr. Fairfield? Present. Mr. Featherling? Mr. Dunnell? Present. Mr. Miller? Present. Mr. Long? Present. Mr. Hunter? Present. Mr. Raymond? Present. Mr. Wheeler? Present. Mr. Seroy? We have a quorum.
All right. I would entertain a motion to allow Tinker Parker to attend remotely. Mr. Long, Mr. Hunter seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. I want to thank all of you for adjusting your schedules to this revised date. Doing this is saving the taxpayers paying for a special meeting and also allows us to meet the requirements for the public viewing of the budget. So thank you for making that adjustment to your schedules. I have no request for public comment. Are there any public comments? Is anyone wishing to make public comment? Hearing none, we'll move to the approval of the minutes for August 25th and August 29th. Can I have a motion to approve both? Mr. Payton with Mr. Long with the second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. I would also like a motion, if the body would agree, to change the agenda so that we could deal with the other business property insurance renewal out of courtesy to the representative from that company. Mr. Dunnell and Mr. Fairfield moves to adjust the agenda that way. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. So we'll go first to other business, 2021 property liability workers' comp inland marine insurance renewal. And Anita, would you introduce the representative?
Good morning, everyone. On via Zoom is Dane Mall, who is our representative with Alliant Mesero, and he assists greatly in addition to George Ryan of Ryan Insurance here in the renewal. They help us as we work through our renewal. So Dane is on Zoom here as well. I really kind of want to just talk about 3 sheets in your packet. In your packet last night, you received a insurance proposal that's about 20 pages long, as well as a couple sheets that do a comparison. Once the packets went out, we identified an error in the numbers, and I'll talk through those in just a second. Dane and I kind of had a little fire drill yesterday afternoon. Things are flying back and forth, and we got those corrected and got the new numbers out, and those came in about, I think, 3:30 last night, right, Dane? Something like that. Yeah. And we have the new copies to you. Tinker, you don't have those remotely, but I'll talk through them and I'll send them to you. I'm sorry, after the meeting, but it was kind of a last-minute fire drill here. Really, what I'd like you to look at are the 2 sheets that I laid out this morning. And in the packet on the proposal, Tinker, it would be page 4 from last night, where there's that premium comparison. Now, the first thing that Dane and I worked through yesterday, or not the first thing, but one of the issues Dane and I worked through yesterday has to do with the liability proposal. And the 2 sheets you'll see at the top, I've circled in red. One says 15,000 deductible option and one says 25,000 deductible option. And what we're talking about there are 2 different rates. Obviously, the one with the $15,000 deductible is higher. That is the deductible, and Dane, jump in, make sure you jump in and correct me when I make a mistake, but has to do with the law enforcement liability deductible. And in your proposal packet that you got last night, in the proposal, it's page 5, but it looks something like this. Tinker, can you see that? And that's really where we're going to talk about that deductible. Right now, we have a deductible on all those claims of $15,000. You can see here the trend of the claims from 2016 through 2021, right? Very small number, 3, 8, 10, 4. This year, 22 to date. And Dane, I think we were talking yesterday, there have been additional claims that have come in after that, haven't there? Do you have an idea how many you've seen come in recently, the last couple weeks?
There's been certainly over a handful that have come in over the last few weeks that I have seen.
Okay.
All related to, I'll call them COVID-related claims.
Correct. So out of the jail exposure to COVID. So the issue became, and Dane did this analysis on page 5 in your books, but when we looked at renewal, Dane wanted to think about what's the difference to the county if we moved from a $15,000 deductible to a $25,000 deductible. What would that mean in terms of the county's premium? And do you want to talk about that sheet a little bit, Dane, that analysis sheet that you did where you talked about the deductible?
Sure, happy to. And it's good to be before the committee here today. So thank you for that opportunity. And just to frame the renewal a little bit is there's a reason why law enforcement liability is being looked at in a little closer way by insurance carriers. It's a very challenging insurance marketplace, and in particular for public entities. So much so that it's actually the worst insurance marketplace there's been since the mid-1980s. So it's very challenging for public entities. The good news is that the county has partnered with ICRMT, and ICRMT is the insurance provider for over 50% of the counties in Illinois, with over 400 members that are a part of ICRMT. ICRMT is a very good partner. And they've been providing a stable program for a long time. So all that being said, we knew that law enforcement liability, we know that this is a challenging issue as a society, and that trickles over, and that we definitely see the impact in the insurance marketplace. So that uncertainty, that public distrust, all those things that are ripped from the headlines that we see for law enforcement liability, that is what brings us to this discussion about the deductibles for the county. So currently you have a $15,000 deductible. ICRMT wanted to kind of move that up to a $25,000 deductible, and that's directly related to the claims that we see at the county in the corrections and jail environment, and the activity that goes on there. So those claims that are experienced, about 80% of the costs of those claims are related to the legal expenses involved with adjudicating these claims. So some of them never see the light of day of a courtroom or a verdict or anything like that, but there's obviously a great deal of costs involved with processing these and having legal work these through the system before they can even get to a motion to dismiss or summary judgment, all of those things. So the $15,000 deductible option and the analysis that we ran, so we wanted to look very closely at that range in between, okay, what is your exposure in between a $15,000 deductible and a $25,000 deductible? And that's what that exhibit kind of indicates. And I think if I were looking, and we've provided data back to 2016 on this, and as you look, the experience if we were back, a few years ago, the experience would say, well, do we need to necessarily worry about having a lower deductible because we're not seeing a great deal of expense. But as you can really see this past year, this is where this uncertainty comes into play. And so in that 20 to 21 year, you see that those incurred expenses in that range of $15,000 to $25,000 ends up being about $84,000 in legal expense costs. So that is where our uncertainty lies, and that's some of the concern because we don't know how that's going to keep projecting into the future. And so that's an important consideration for the committee and for the county in looking at this, is what has happened in the last year. And then also another important consideration is that once you make a decision to increase a deductible, sometimes it's a little bit harder then for the insurance carrier to want to drop that deductible later. So you currently have the $15,000 deductible. So there's a real thought process here that, well, once you move it up, it might be really hard to move it down if you wanted to. So a couple of key things to think about in maintaining that deductible level that you currently have.
Right. So what Dane and I...
Just a minute. Are there any questions on the committee at this point? Mr. Hunter?
Just a question. Dane and maybe Anita can address this. And I'm going to draw a parallel. You were talking about the legal expenses and so forth in terms of dealing with all of these particular complaints, none of which prevail in terms of liability, right?
Currently, that's correct.
Right, okay. What my question is, and I'm going to draw a parallel in terms of state grievances, for example. There are contracts and there are personnel rules you can file a grievance under, as well as a union grievance. What can happen is that those things are addressed locally, internally. And I was wondering if there's any kind of procedure that you guys know about that these particular matters that have been filed by the inmates could be resolved internally before they see the light of day in terms of where you have to spend countless number of dollars in terms of legal expenses. So what I'm saying is, for example, with the union grievance with the state of Illinois, you can file that stuff and they're resolved, hopefully before they go to IDHR, Illinois Department of Human Rights, or EEOC and get a right sue letter. Then you got to spend a whole bunch of money in terms of dealing with that stuff. Is there such an animal that you guys could maybe consider? Well,
go ahead, Dane.
Yeah, so sure. I know exactly what you're talking about, and really there is not an administrative remedy similar or in parallel like you have with the IDHR or the EEOC for these types of matters. We have quarterly, claim review meetings at least twice a year at the county where we discuss these matters, and it's come up a number of times is, well, how do we move these claims through the process, not just COVID related claims, but any of these what are called pro se claims, where you have the inmates that aren't even hiring an attorney on their own because Correct. They don't have the wherewithal to do that, but they're creating these lawsuits on their own, and they want their day in court. So we're trying our best to perhaps even move, and certainly the sheriff's office could speak to that, to move these folks out of our system, out of the county system, so that they no longer become our issue anymore, is one of the strategies. But it is a very difficult situation because each one of these claims has to go through that legal process. So I don't know of an administrative process that we could go through to do that.
Correct. So these are civil suits. They're going through the court process, and obviously any citizen can sue someone else, valid or not, and that's what we're seeing. So although we believe that our exposure is minimal, it still takes time and an attorney to represent the county in court on these matters. And remember this, I mean, you think a pro se, that should be simple, right? Well, what's going to happen through the courts is they're going to make sure those detainees are allowed their day in court. It may be longer because they may not come prepared, so it gets delayed. Every time it's delayed, that's another court call. It's another running through the system. So all those costs add up when our representative is coming back here and representing the county in court as those cases get delayed or perhaps moved to a hearing, et cetera. So any other questions?
Mr. Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we would save about $69.5 by going to a larger deductible.
Correct.
But each case has a deductible.
Exactly.
And so we would only have to have 2.77746 cases, about 3 cases, going to $25,000 deductible to kind of blow that $70,000 out of the water.
Correct. So right.
Does that sound like a good idea?
Exactly, which is why Dana and I are not recommending that we change our deductible at this time.
Especially since we had 22 already?
Exactly. These 22 cases are not resolved. They're currently in the court system. So who knows how long it will take to resolve them. We hope they're going to be resolved at a November 22nd court date. They may not be. They may be continued. Again, there's 22 now. What's coming behind them? So you're right. Now, as Dana and I talked yesterday, now is not the time.
And we're projecting into 22. We're not talking about
Correct.
Current. We're talking into 22.
Correct.
And there's not going to be less.
Correct. Well,
chances are.
Well,
if 22 cases don't prevail, we hope that I mean, in a communal living setting, right? People are going to share experiences. And if 22 cases get dismissed, we hope that will send the message that we really are doing the right thing at the jail and that we are keeping detainees safe. So
even if we go back in our history, we're talking about 4 last year, 10 the year before.
Correct.
I think it's easy math.
Right. Correct. So the things you received yesterday, the paperwork and the proposal was at the $25,000 limit, and what Dane and I worked through, I asked Dane to do yesterday, was recalculate based on that $15,000 deductible that we currently have. So you see that in this sheet, it's an additional $69,000 in premium there, so that the premium amount isn't the 1.116 million that you got yesterday, but it is $1,185,771. So $69,000 higher.
Okay.
To keep that $15,000 deductible. So the second issue relates to work comp. That was another change from the packet you saw yesterday. What you had yesterday was about, I think, 865 or so thousand, or 685. 686. And in going through the proposal yesterday, I identified that the salary estimates used for work comp were not what we had corrected on the application. So the application comes back draft, and then I go through and evaluate, and we actually run our actual payroll based on work comp and do some analysis, and we had sent in corrected numbers. Those corrected numbers didn't make its way through the process and weren't reflected. Now the issue is this, so it's really higher. You would say, why did you tell? Why didn't you just be quiet, Anita? Because the issue is this. If the premium is based on that low, first off, it's not right. And second of all, if you're paying a premium based on those lower amounts all year, what happens after the end of our fiscal year is that the insurance company comes and does an actual audit of your actual payroll. And if those estimates aren't correct, you're going to get a big bill. So there's no point you want to do it right, so you're recording that expense in the proper period. And the other thing, Steve and I were talking about yesterday when we then scrambled with what he had in the budget and whether or not it's covered, is that additional payment is going to come maybe January, February, March timeframe, usually, something like that. At the point this county is in its very difficult cash flow situation, and I'm going to hand you a bill for an additional $70,000 or whatever it is. I think it turned out to be about $60,000, or and say this needs to be paid right away. That's not good either from a cash flow standpoint, from an accounting standpoint, and how we reflect, and from just the ethical way of doing things the right way. So the numbers were revamped, and I will say this, Dane really went to bat for us so that the county didn't bear all that additional cost. Like I said, I think he negotiated down, and it went from 686 to 703. So that's the other revision you see there. So the total package for both groups, the liability, property, inland marine, that's all in that top number, and then work comp is 703 for a total of $1,889,331. Cyber is now included in this number as well, so includes everything. Anything else, Dane, that I probably should have mentioned? No?
No, you did a great job, very thorough.
Are there any further questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the recommendation. Mr. Dunhill, Mr. Long, motion to accept. Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just number 9, please.
I'm sorry.
Excuse me, 6, 9, whatever. 6 or 9. Anita stated it was 188.9. It's actually 1819882. I just didn't want that to be incorrectly reflected in the motion. The final column down there. Oop, wait a minute.
No,
sorry.
no.
Wrong sheet. 1889331. Sorry.
All right. Any other comments, questions? We have a motion on the floor involves spending, so we'll need a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Deno?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Mr. Raymond?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
So thank you, and thank you, Dane, for all your help yesterday. It was great.
Well, thank you for your help, as always, helping through the process. We couldn't do it without Anita.
Oh, how nice. I think I'll go sit down now.
In that case,
long.
Mr. McCarty and the Finance Department will move to the Finance Department. You have the information in terms of the miscellaneous financial reports. Starting, of course, with sales tax, income tax, use tax, personal property replacement tax, and inmate detainee bed rental. Good morning.
Good morning. You're doing a good job. I'll let you keep going.
I'll let you go from here. You have a little more.
All right. Good morning. On the sales tax, the trend continues to be very positive for this year. In a lot of these trends, use tax, the personal property replacement tax, I can tell you that, well, for personal property replacement tax, that is a one-time adjustment by the state. So it is in the bank, we'll take it, but that trend will not continue, but it is a nice influx. For the rest of them, as we get into the budget conversation, we went very conservative, so this new trend, a lot of this trend is based off FY19 with a small percentage change. So we saw, with COVID, FY20 go down, like for sales tax, for example, and now FY21 going way up. So we're seeing a lot of fluctuation. So I'm not comfortable following the current trend until we see more trend, if you will. So we went conservative as far as budget-wise for next year. It is nice to receive this. It has helped, but we're being very cautious as far as future trends. So, I don't know.
Any questions on those revenue
I
items?
won't spend a lot more time.
If not, well, I will move to cash flow analysis.
Won't spend a lot of time on cash flow. We received another large distribution, the property tax distribution this month. So it's probably, I would say, the highest of the year at this point. So we are within 30 to 45 days of all of our bills. So it's everything's flowing well, and I'm starting to work on the estimates heading into the spring and May and June of next year, as we head into the the difficult time, and see how how that trend's going to look during that time. So I don't have a lot to share with you other than just giving you the update at this point.
Questions? Seeing none, we'll move to, there's one claim here recommended for non-approval. Did you want to speak to that, maybe?
All I can do is this came from the auditor's office without recommendation, and the notes at the bottom. That's all I know about it.
Okay.
So
Motion.
Mr. Wheeler?
Motion will take precedence.
All right. Mr. Hunter,
Motion approved.
is there a second? A second by Mr. Dunhill. All right, Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you, sir. The do we know if the county clerk was approached with this question, or is it just reject the claim and let the world figure it out? Did we get any?
I'm not sure if the auditor's office went to the county clerk or not.
Because the question is their question, not ours, really.
Mr. Henderson?
Good morning, everybody. This is the first I've heard of this. What claim is this for?
This is, my apologies, Dan, I should have sent it. I figured the auditor's office would reach out. It's for Smith County Dykstra Nome for professional service rendered for QuickBooks. It is for $4,950 out of Fund 230.
We contracted with Smith County Dykstra Nome to install our QuickBooks point of sale program and provide support.
The item circled is item number 53100. So apparently they didn't like that you chose 53100, which we use all the time in the system.
I didn't receive any information from the auditor at all about this. I apologize for any inconveniences caused to this board.
Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think any apology is necessary, because a professional relationship would mean that the auditor would contact you directly if he had a problem with it, before just rejecting a claim and sending it here and wasting all of our time. Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor. We'll need a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Aye. Mr. Payton? Aye. Ms. Parker? Aye. Mr. Fairfield? Aye. Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
We move to the claims for the month. The monthly claims report. Is there a motion to approve the claims? Mr. Long? Ms. Weber? Motion to approve the claims. Any discussion? Any questions? If not, a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Aye. Mr. Payton? Aye. Ms. Parker? Aye. Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Mr. Raymond?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
fiscal year 2022 interfund borrowing resolution. You have the resolution.
Well, you have fiscal year 21 in there. We'll ask, I
I'm
put it
sorry.
in for reference for
I
the
was
committee.
reading off the agenda item.
Yeah, so that you would know. This is an annual resolution that covers the fiscal year for the daily interfund borrowing as needed. So we'll ask the state's attorney's office to update it to the, everything to FY22. So we're doing it in advance of the fiscal year switchover. So.
Okay, so
this is it'll pretty much read the same other than updated dates.
all right. Is there a motion to approve the resolution? Mr. Hunter, is there a second? Mr.
Parker.
Payton? Any questions on this? If not, this does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Ms. Weber, Mr. Payton, Ms. Parker, Mr. Fairfield, Mr. Dennell, Mr. Miller, Mr. Long, Mr. Hunter, Mr. Raymond, Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
We move to the fiscal year 22 tentative budget. We're going to need to take a little longer on this one. And Mr. McCurdy, what have you got for that?
Yeah, as far as, well, Mr. Chairman, do you want to speak on this, or do you want me to go ahead and hit all the highlights, and then as far as?
Well, why don't you do the highlights, and then we can talk about some of the policy stuff.
Okay. Kelly, do you have that file by chance for the highlights? Okay, thanks. We put together a few highlights. I'll hit some of these here for the entire document. So as far as the general fund, it is balanced at $32,668,334. The total of the debt service and special revenue funds, I'm going to shorten it. It's $31.3 million. Highway funds total is
Question right there.
yes,
Now, when you say special revenue funds, does that include tort and pension there?
it does. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The highway funds at 30.3 million, and then health department and 911 approximately 9.6. We're still waiting the 911 exact number, so I averaged. So you have before you in total total of 104 million $32,176 in total budget for approval this morning. It's approximately 12 million higher than our original budget in FY21, and that's primarily due to budgeting the ARPA funds for those transactions that we're doing with the ARPA money. The FY22, the general fund budget expense is approximately 1.4 million less than the FY21 budget. What makes that reduction? Some of the few spots, the correction budget is 1.4 million less than FY21. A reminder that's due to the state's elimination of the DHS ICE, the bed rental program. Capital development is 139,000 less than FY21. Some of that can be contributed to the ARPA funds and the ability to purchase infrastructure, critical infrastructure, and primarily in this particular case, vehicles. And then there is an overall reduction in grant expense throughout all the various departments that have grants of approximately $560,000. Some of those were CURE grant, and some are just regular, if you would, regular changes. As far as any increases on the expense side of the general fund budget, as we've all discussed thoroughly the last few meetings, the health insurance for the employer and the part that the general fund covers is approximately $695,000 higher than it was in FY21. So that 18% equals $695,000 in increase in 1 year for the general fund. And then other small increases in various areas, or for if there's union contracts in place, or a base 2% wage change throughout. So there were some reduction in the general fund budget revenue. There's 132,000 reduction in circuit clerk fees from FY21, 398,000 reduction in sale of capital assets, and that's due primarily to the ending of the agreement when we sold our portion of the River Valley Juvenile Detention Center. 2.1 million reduction in the bed rental housing, state elimination of the DHS bed rental program. And then on the revenue side of the grant change, approximately $403,000 reduction there. We did see some increases in the general fund for revenue, 568,000 increase to the corporate tax levy. Some of that is because I would say about 300,000, give or take, because of we'll get into this next month when we do the levy, but we reduced the tort levy to help the corporate levy to help offset some of these changes for this year. 368,000 increased income tax, 123,000 increased the replacement tax, and 75,000 increased the recorder fees. So even though those sound like, you know, some major changes like income tax, replacement tax, recorder fees, all of those are they're trending right now way above that. So I just picked some of those out just to identify, you know, some of the major changes. So that makes up some of the pluses and minuses, if you will, for the general fund budget in the challenge of getting it balanced for FY22. So how do you want to go through the document?
Well, let me comment in terms of your highlights. Clearly, I think number 3, in terms of reduction of general fund budget, everyone needs to be conscious of. We're talking 2.1 million reduction in revenue in terms of bed rental housing. So that's a huge hit to our budget, and a compliment, I guess, to the Sheriff's Department that they're looking at ways to reduce their expenses of 1.4 million. So they worked hard on trying to do their share on this. And that's one thing that I think we need to make sure that every member of this committee and then the board and then the public realizes that state legislature really hit us hard, and we're doing what we can to make an adjustment because of that. Are there other comments people want to make on the highlights? Well, let's have a motion to approve the proposed budget, and then we can have further discussion. Is there a motion to approve the, Ms. Weaver? I'm sorry. Mr. Hunter, are you seconding? All right. Further comments, discussion. Mr. Hunter.
What I really like is the highlights that you've got, Stephen. I mean, that puts things in perspectives, so we don't have to deal with all the minutia. And those items which you have enumerated are quite apparent in terms of when we review the budget and the impact.
Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, there's one other area I think would be of importance. In the document, just a few pages in, actually the 4th page in, there is a fund balance analysis and totals. You know, we've spent a lot of time in the last 5 or 6 years looking at that. You know, now that we've come to a positive number throughout all, it isn't as discussed, but it's still important, and you know, gives some perspective back to fiscal year 2008, where, you know, when the economic change happened, and then our venture, if you will, all the way from that time, and a comparison of where the funds are, you know, as compared to that threshold, if you will. And you can see one of the reasons that we hit the tort fund is it's expected to be just over $3 million this year. So we felt that it could help out and it could survive on its own. And basically rob Peter to pay Paul kind of a scenario as far as levy for the general fund versus the tort fund. So that will drop potentially in the next couple of years, but it's still higher than it was back in 2008. The pension fund is just now reaching the level that it was at in 2008. So we're trying to help the general fund get back. But the positive thing is it looks like with these trends of sales tax and these one-time payments with replacement tax, that it will help the general fund go from approximately 1.7 million ending fund balance to end this year with approximately 2.6, close to $2.7 million fund balance. So it's still going up, and I think that's positive, and we got a lot of challenges. You know, we just discussed what the state sent us, but at the same time, everybody is working hard, and it is showing up that we're still making positive strides in, you know, fund balance and overall fiscal health. So so even though we're moving money around, and we'll discuss again in detail those specifics with the levy next month, we're still moving in a positive direction. So I wanted to make sure everybody also saw that fund balance total and the big picture, you know, what's happening with our three major funds.
Well, as I look at the fund balance, I do notice that between 2021 and 2022, the general fund balance is the same, identical.
Well, and that's because we have a balanced budget. So right. Yeah. So, and so hopefully it'll stay there, or if we can hopefully improve again.
So even with
yeah, hopefully
the shifts, it keeps that. Any other questions or comments in regard to the budget? Mr. Witter.
Maybe I should fill in some of the reasons behind some of these things here. So you notice the 2.1 million reduction in bed rental, and then obviously the associated loss of revenue. We have to account for that starting January 1st. So this budget has to include, or not include, should I say, any revenue and any cost associated with detaining, you know, the federal ICE population that was at our jail. Now that lawsuit's ongoing. So when that is resolved, then we'll have a better idea in 23, hopefully, on what our 23 and 24 and 25 budgets will look like. But this budget allows us to not go backwards, allows us to go forward, kind of tread water, if you will. And that's what shifting the levy does. We have spent a lot of time building up the tort fund, and what was the negative on that when we started this? It might have been a couple million at one point.
Well,
I can't remember. It's been a while.
The lowest it was in 2015. It got down to 544.
544. Okay, that's when everything was negative 4 million and 5 million.
The total was all of them were.
So we built that back up, and now we have to shift it to take a little more from the tort fund, which is all of our liability insurance money and, you know, all of that kind of stuff that pays those bills. We've shifted because we're tax capped, so we still have a balanced budget. We're still not going backwards, but we can only do that for a few years. We can't do that forever, or else we'll drain the tort fund. I hope you understand. So this allows us to get from A to B, and there allows us to not make major structural changes in terms of the sheriff's department, because ICE wasn't out there picking up for people present in this country illegally, or they weren't doing all of those different things. Even with marshals went down during COVID. So we've made adjustments already to staffing. That's why that doesn't equal the 4.5 that we're losing total from our relationship with ICE, because that was already reduced in 2020. I hope that makes sense to the committee, because we are being hurt by the state of Illinois changing bail reform and, you know, cashless bail and all those different things. That's hurting the revenue in our courthouse. That's how we operate the courthouse. The all-out assault on county finances out of Springfield, not just Kankakee, but all counties, should be noted. The things that they don't pay for anymore, the revenue they take away from us, they're expecting our taxpayers to pick up, or they lose those services. So we're able to get through the first phase of this with this budget and kudos to Steve and Anita, mainly Steve, but we all work as a team putting this together. But then also allowing us to have that bridge while this lawsuit shakes out. That's the kind of overall thinking and policy behind this budget. And then also I want to mention that $139,000 of ARPA money for the squads, you'll see a lot of that coming up. We're trying to use other revenue sources to pay for things that local tax dollars don't have to right now. And that's a responsible use, I think, of that money. I think most people would agree.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, are we ready for a roll call vote? Roll call vote on approving the proposed budget.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Aye. Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Dunnell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Mr. Raymond?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Do you have anything more, Mr. Hurd?
No, but I believe I'll be up here for the ARPA stuff as well.
Okay. We'll move to the ARPA requests. I'd like to move the Pembroke Township Pumping Station repair request to the top of the agenda. So let's turn to that page first. There's a lot of pages to flip through to get to the one that we're talking about. Okay, here we go. The desired funding shown on this is $156,854.86. If everyone's found that. Does someone want to give a little background on it?
Thank you.
Mr. Wheeler?
I think in this case, I'll put a little bit of context on it, and then obviously Mr. Payton would have a lot to say, or have something to say, excuse me. But I'll put words in his mouth. But the number actually, if you turn back a page, we have a new cover page for all of these because we have a process. I want to mention that to the committee.
Okay.
Everything is coming down to the finance department with all documentation, and then they are creating or filling in this cover sheet. It's going to have one more evolution, if you will, into something that's designed a little bit easier on the eyes, but it's so this committee knows which fund it qualifies for, which section of the law it applies to, in this case 5.40. Is it from the Lost Revenue Fund? No. So it's letting this committee know where the vetting has occurred. Because a lot of people say, well, have you seen their tax returns? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? Yes, but we're just not bringing all that up to you to have this sitting in front of you. They're keeping all that for the backup downstairs for the Department of Treasury when they file quarterly.
Obviously, any committee members that wanted to see that could go to that, down to the finance department.
Yeah, it's readily available. It's stuff that's freedom of information, all of that. But the amount is $156,855 because it was just a roundup.
Okay.
You know, like a not to exceed number. But then once you get into this, we've talked about this for a couple of months. Now we finally have we have 3 bids downstairs. And that's what we had asked for. The lowest bid was that amount of money from a company called Gas Voda. And one of the things that the committee needs to know is that and Steve can speak on this at length if somebody has specific questions, but if you receive over $50,000, you have to be GATA certified and compliant. And is that the correct way to say that, Steve? Obviously, well, not obviously, the township is not. So we have to pay this directly, okay, and contract with the entity that's going to do this work. Okay, so I have things in motion regarding, finding out about our liability and things like that. That's my concern, 5 years down the road if it breaks down. So, Mr. Payton could talk about, he's going to be meeting with the attorney to develop the IGA between the county and the township, so we can do the work, pay the bill. I'm asked the state's attorney, do those 3 bids qualify as an open bid for us, or do we have to rebid it? You see, those are questions that we have to ask now that we know what that price is. If it was under 50, then it would be different. We could just give it to the governmental entity. So I want to let everybody know why the gyrations that we're going to be going through have to happen that way, because it protects not only us, Pembroke Township, the people that are on the system, but then also what may happen in 5 or 6 years. So is that...
Mr. Payton, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I appreciate the board considering this request. It's a needed...
I'm sorry.
It's a needed... Oh, you didn't turn me on, huh?
Go ahead.
I appreciate the board considering this request. It's a needed request. It is emergency, but it's not the county emergency, it's the Pembroke Township emergency. We have ways that's bagging up as I speak, and we need to get this work done as fast as we can. And I will be meeting with the IGA this afternoon to clear up any legal responsibility of the Kankakee County. So I asked the board.
Is there a motion in regard to this? Mr. Hunter, motion?
Yeah, and making...
Oh, comment?
Yeah, I'll make that motion. But what's really pragmatic about this situation is that this governmental unit is working with their underserved community in this particular instance, and there has been substantial interface with the chairman and the mayor of Village of Hopkins Park and the duly elected township supervisor, Mr. Payton, on this particular matter. I mean, it's a public health situation. You've heard Mr. Payton articulate the dire circumstance. I've had conversations with the chairman, Mr. Wheeler, and I'm really pleased that this body is taking this proactive approach in addressing this particular matter, and has expended substantial hours towards looking into this matter and working in concert with these governmental units.
All right, I heard you make a motion to approve the request. Yes. Is there a second to that motion? Ms. Weber? Discussion.
Just another couple points of information. This goes into the ARPA fund, so it doesn't go into lost revenue. The ARPA fund is obviously much harder to spend, so I don't think that's going to impact the ARPA fund in a grand manner for us to be able to use that for other things as well. Another big part of this is, and I think I'd said it and others had echoed, really the necessity to not have to see this movie again in 5 or 6 years. And this project originally was just repair the pumps and all the electronics for around 80 grand. Now it includes a bypass, so if it ever breaks down again, they can bypass the whole system and go to other pumping stations, and it won't back up in that area. So now we're not going to hear this again, because we've done our part to get it so the system can be bypassed if it breaks down again. Does that make sense? We've looked at the future and what we've addressed, and I think as far as the county board goes, our end of it.
Mr. Hunter?
Randy and I concur with what you're saying. However, let me say this, in terms of ongoing maintenance, that's crucial to this as well too. And I know we've had some discussion regarding what might be able to be done in that regard. Conceptually, we talked, and I'm sure the chairman will attest to this, is that a community benefits initiative could be done by Karma. I serve on that particular board, and there could be some relationship developed to address that. Although Mr. Payton and Mr. Hodge and so forth.
I hear where you're going, but I think we've got a motion on the floor, and let's address that issue. And then if you want to comment on further, that would be appropriate.
But that's going to have to be dealt with in the future. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Any other questions on the motion on the floor? we have a motion on the floor. We'll need a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Aye. Mr. Payton? Aye. Ms. Parker? Aye. Mr. Fairfield? Aye. Mr. Dennell? Aye. Mr. Miller? Aye. Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter? Aye. Mr. Raymond? Aye. Mr. Wheeler? Aye. Motion carries.
I want to review these other requests. Do we need to have a roll call on each individual one, or can we vote to consolidate?
We could vote to consolidate, but you're gonna have to talk about each one of them.
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk about each one.
And the dollar amount. I can go through the list if you
All right.
want. If you want to do that.
Let's go through
voted on.
Let's go through the list, and
does the committee have to vote on it?
if
You can go through the list and make a motion to combine and approve, or consider one separately if that.
anyone that wants to be withdrawn.
Okay, someone could just say, let's talk about this one separately.
All right.
Okay.
So let's start with the list as it's on the agenda, the Moments Park District.
Yeah, Moments Park District.
You'll need to back up. Give the committee members a minute to get to their location in terms of their material. All right. If everyone has that location, go ahead, Mr. McCarty.
Okay. So yeah, we got a application from Moments Park District. It's ARPA applicable. The ARPA code would be 7.3. The request was for $24,972.37. The eligible funding is $10,000, and the notes on that is a cap fund for this type of at $20,000. They had a net loss or greater than $20,000, and it's at the 50% reduction for required match by municipality per the county board thing. So it would be $10,000 for the eligible funding. That one. The next one is Chiropractic Associates of Kankakee. It is eligible ARPA for code 2.90. The requested amount was $20,000. The eligible funding is $5,000. It's under the cap fund at $10,000. They had a net loss or greater than $10,000, and then it's within the 50% reduction for required match by municipality. Next one is Merchant Street Art Gallery. It is ARPA related, code 2.10. Their request was for $36,000. Eligible funding is $10,000. The note cap fund at $10,000. Net loss at or greater than $10,000. Andy, this is under the non-for-profit. Does that when is the committee going to take up that change?
It would have to start here.
Next month. You can explain a little bit about it, but okay. Yeah, like what we were talking about. You know,
okay, yeah.
It's after this round, you know, because we haven't voted on anything yet. The question is these non-for-profits, they reside in municipalities, but do they serve entire communities? You know, and that's kind of where we're wrestling with right now is that, you know, not-for-profit X is in Bourbonnais, but they have clientele in Kankakee and everywhere else. Then there's other not-for-profits that are dedicated just towards municipal efforts. And so that's where we have to have a broader discussion coming back here in the future. With this one, you know, it just came up in the discussion we had the other day.
Okay, I misunderstood then the timing. So if these are going through under the current policy, then the 50% reduction would apply then. So Merchant Street would go from 10,000 to 5,000 because of that 50%.
That's what's in place now.
Yeah. So
now, if somebody wants to make the motion to leave it the way that it is, then we can do that. I don't advise it. I advise one policy and adhering to that, but you know that you can't stop somebody from making a motion. So,
Mr. Chairman, would you advise that if we were to change the policy, it would be appropriate for a nonprofit to make a second application?
I would think that's fair.
Yeah.
So at this point, we follow the current policy. If we feel that policy needs to be revised, they would be eligible to apply under a new policy.
If the head nod
If
from
that's
the
what the committee
I think
ends up saying.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It might be something for committee members to consider whether they want to include in their policy.
In terms of ARPA, Steve, would you agree that that's an acceptable way
Yeah,
to go
I
about
believe that
things, the
would
way
be
the
fine.
Treasury's looking for this?
Yeah, I believe we'll be fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So this will be for 5,000.
it'll be for 5,000 for Merchant Street Art
So
Gallery
make that adjustment in your records.
because of our current policy.
All right, let's move on.
Next one, Chatterbox Cafe. It is ARPA related, code 2.90. Request was for 20,000. This is under the cap fund at 10,000. Net loss at or greater than 10,000. 50% reduction for required match by municipality. So the eligible funding is 5,000. Next one, Options Center for Independent Living is ARPA related. The fund, the ARPA code 2.10. The request is 48,000. This one will also have to be adjusted to 5,000 because it's within the 50% because of the municipality being within municipality. For Options Center.
All right.
Okay. Garden of Prayer Youth Center. It is ARPA related. The code is 2.10. The request was for 10,000. The eligible funding. The eligible funding will be 5,000 for this one as well because it's within a municipality.
Can you? And why is that, Mr. Chairman?
It's within a municipality.
Yeah. However, it's my understanding that they provide services externally from a municipality. Is that
Under our current policy, we have not actually used that criteria. And so we're going to have a discussion whether we want to modify our current policy. Mr. Wheeler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had an idea, and this may help with some of the consternation on this. We have the ability to put it on the executive agenda to clarify at executive committee next week, and then they both could go to the full board with, we could pass what our current policy is here, and then by the time it gets to the full board, it can be corrected. You see where I'm going with that? Because we don't have an official policy that spell it out. We didn't consider that when we started. And I think it is a consideration. And there is a delineation because, you know, where the services that they provide, where are they directed at? I can think of one that is just for the development of Kankakee that we've got a request for. And to me, that would be just, that would be under the match.
Well,
but
both.
Does that work? We can bring them both, we can bring the new policy to executive next week and then take them both to the full board.
It would save both our employees and the organizations a lot of paperwork.
well, I'm not real clear. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So what does that happen to the determination tentative determination you've made for 5,000 as opposed to 10?
I hear that the chairman is suggesting there be a discussion at the executive committee that would revise the policy and will also allow to implement that in terms of these requests, so that actually all of these requests have to be approved by the full county board. If those policy proposals pass at executive, it's not going to slow down the distribution of money at all. It will allow everything to take place, and it would save both our employees having to read an extra application. It would save the organizations not having to do this. So if it turns out executive is willing to revise the policy I think that will be beneficial to everybody concerned, but that'll have to be a decision of executive committee.
Yeah, and I understand it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for those comments. I'm just saying to you for consideration at the executive committee that Garden Prair's services are macro and not just confined to a specific locale, so.
Okay, noted.
I have a question for our sake as well. Could these non-for-profits come out of this committee with either 10,000 or 5,000, depending on if the executive committee votes on the change and the county board votes on the change? So if the committee disagrees and the board disagrees, which I doubt that would happen, but it would come out either 10,000 or 5,000 so that it's clear as far as the funding and what we need to do after the board continues this discussion.
If the committee is open to that, I think that would be appropriate.
Kosher with that.
Mr. Chairman?
I would recommend that we stick to the current policy we have and okay it for 5, but that will change if we enact that new policy at executive to 10.
If you take
and then
that
it'll come
out,
to the full board
10.
with 10
Okay.
at that point, because we would pass the new policy at full board and then all the ARPA things. Does that make sense? So this allows us to tee it up and get it ready for what I think will be that eventual change. We just didn't even consider it, and there's a lot of that. You know,
Right.
there's just I don't know anybody that's got this figured out yet.
Ms. Weber?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if my microphone's on? Okay. Okay, thank you. I just want to confirm that we have mentioned 3 that were stated at 10 that were going back to 5 for just now. So it was the Merchant Street, the options, and Garden of Prayer. Do you agree
That's
with
correct
that?
so far.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's move on. The next one.
Okay. Garden of Prayer. Child Network is next. ARPA related code 2.10. The request was for 40,000. The eligible funding is 9,229. So they're under the cap fund at 10,000 and had a net loss of less than 10,000. This one will have to go also to the 50% as well.
Now, their eligible funding was less than 10,000 because of their loss was less than 10,000.
Because of their, operational.
I wanted everyone to be clear on that,
What they supplied us, it was.
based on the documents they provided us. All right, fine.
Okay. And then the county recorder request. This is ARPA related, code 1.80. The request total amount is 65,000 for the project. The eligible and request amount for ARPA funds was 48,750. This is a scanning project for online customer searching. So it's part of the communications of under the ARPA guidelines of improvement. Other departments are doing this, to improve communications and for working off-site and remotely.
So everyone's clear here. I want to be sure, how is this changed from a previous request, or is this a different type of request from the recorder's office? I know we'd had previous discussion.
Yeah, I'll let
Mr. Wheeler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is the same request, and the recorder's using, I believe it's like 21,000. 16.2, yeah, out of her special funds that are collected for digitization. So that's why you'll see this and the circuit clerks back here, is because they're committing their special funds to these projects.
The recorder, did you want to speak?
No, I just wanted to reiterate, after a conversation with the chairman, we agreed funding part of the project through my special funds and then using the ARPA funds to escalate this project so that it's done faster for our customer base, so that they have accessibility to our product and not having to come into the county.
Well, thank you for that. It's great cooperation. All right, next.
Yeah, a request from the Chief Judge for the 21st Judicial Circuit Court. It is ARPA related under the 1.80. This is for the rental of the Knights of Columbus space for juror assembly for social distancing. It is an ongoing expense. I want to make sure that's noted. And I gave just the year-to-date number from March 3rd beyond, and current is approximately 6,100 year-to-date, but this is ongoing. So that just gives a scope of, an estimated dollar amount, for the time frame that we've had so far for juror assembly.
Mr. Whitter, how's this going to work in terms of approving dollar amounts? Do we need to have an exact dollar amount for this?
Not this one, because it's one of those where it would go to future allocations when we, and you'll probably do this maybe quarterly or every semi-annually, just kind of transfer out of one bucket into the other. I'm assuming that's the way you're going to manage it.
Yeah, at this point, it's more of an internal journal voucher, adjustment, because of.
So we just need to approve it that, yes, we're okay with this use.
Yeah, it's approved. And then the Kinky County Circuit Clerk request, ARPA related 1.80 for the code. The total project is $315,000, and it is eligible for $315,000. It is another scanning project for customer employee searching, taking paper, turning it into digital, and also opening up needed space in the courthouse. And Sandy is here if there's any questions on that.
Okay. Let's go on. I guess that's the last one.
That is the last one, because you already covered Pembroke Township.
With the intention of consolidating this, are there any of these requests that you want to pull out separately? Ms. Weber.
Did I miss Good Shepherd, or did it get pulled off? Or?
Did I do Good Shepherd?
No.
It's on the agenda, I noticed too.
We didn't do it.
It doesn't seem to be in the packet.
What happened to Good Shepherd? That'll be my fault. With all the organization yesterday, I missed, what did I do with Good Shepherd?
Don't you think if it's on the agenda, we could consider it if we had the information?
It was, I know it was ARPA eligible, Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was ARPA eligible. It met the criteria per Steve.
It did.
And it's another one of those 10,000.
It was at 10,000.
But they are not in a municipality. Yeah. So that, because they're outside of Moments. They're not in the village. So technically they're outside.
There is an application, there's a cover sheet. It got separated somehow, and I apologize for that. We did vet it. They provided all the information. We have all the information. It just got separated.
And it'll be in for full board.
Yeah.
We'll have it in there for full board, but it did pass muster, if you will. And it's the full 10, not.
If the committee is comfortable with that explanation, we'll include that in the consolidated request. Are there any want
to include it?
I'm sorry?
Do we need a motion to include it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's on the agenda. It's, as long as it's on the agenda, I think we're okay. Are there any that anyone wants to remove to discuss further? Hearing no request to remove any items, is there a motion to consolidate these requests? Mr. Long and Mr. Payton, seconds. Consolidate and approve these requests. We'll need a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond? Mr. Wheeler? Motion carries.
Mr. Weaver.
Just to make sure we have the authority, the motion, the intention of the motion is if executive passes that clarification, then it goes with the full amount for those that were reduced to 5,000. I just want to make sure that's the intent here, that we are able to
Mr. Long,
make that change.
Is that your intent?
That is my intent.
The second approves that? Let's see, the second was
Mr. Payton?
Mr. Payton. You approve that?
That's my intent.
All right, that is cleared in terms of the intent. All right. Is there anything else
Just
you have?
real quick, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but
No, do.
we had some questions on where are we with the funding in the total. So there's a update with today's information in there for the summary of the total ARPA fund. Also, the total of the sub amounts of the 250,000 for the business and nonprofit fund, as well as a non-covered governmental unit. So it gives an update of where those dollar amounts and also the lost revenue fund. And make a note, it's for the current funding. There is another amount coming May, June of FY22, but so this is the current amount that we have and what we've done. So there will be a future not only distribution but allocations and projects and stuff that the board has been. So that's the next step. So you do have the running totals with today's information included in the packet.
All right, all that's found just before the ARPA funding requests, if you're trying to find that within your packet. It's right after the resolution on interfund borrowing authorization. So you get a good summary, and I want to thank you for that summary. I think that's important for the committee to be following. Anything else you have?
That's all I have.
Any questions for Mr. McCarty before he steps down? Hearing none, we move to the Treasurer's office. And you have the Treasurer's report, County Collector's report, monthly resolutions. Is there a motion to combine and approve? Mr. Fairfield, a second. Mr. Dunhill. This can be a voice vote if there are no questions or comments. All in favor of combining and approving the Treasurer's Office reports, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. I think we can go on. We go on to the Sheriff's Department. He has his monthly update in the packet. Are there any questions or comments want to be made on that? If not, there's no information available from the auditor. Once again, he is not present and has provided no information to the committee. We move to old business, amending resolution 2021-07-13-275. All right, this is a authorizing purchase of the poll pad iPad cases and docking stations. Mr. Henderson.
Good morning. In July, the full board passed the resolution to allocate $74,838 for the purchase of the new poll pads with the cases. I received the poll pads, actually they came in yesterday afternoon, and received an invoice earlier this week, and it was $972 more. I called them and asked them why it was more than the amount that we had agreed upon in the first quote. In their first quote, they had omitted including a component to the poll pad, which the driver's license or ID cards rests upon, so that they can scan those in and process voters quicker. So I need to have that piece of equipment with the poll pads in order for them to function as efficiently as they can. So I had spoken to Chairman Wheeler about this, and we decided to bring it to Finance to see if we could include that additional $972 into the resolution.
Is there a motion to approve this amending resolution? Mr. Hunter, Mr. Miller seconds. Any questions or discussion? It's spending money. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Aye. Mr. Payton? Aye. Mr. Fairfield? Aye. Mr. Dunnell? Aye. Mr. Miller? Aye. Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Mr. Raymond?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler? Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Is there any other old or new business to come before the committee? Any other old or new business? Hearing none. Does the body have any other motions? Mr. Long, a motion to adjourn?
Yes, please.
Second.
And Mr. Payton seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.